The Daily Derech. We are walking the path of holiness.
Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of exploring Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, and the Rabbinical Assembly. Today is the fourth day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 19th of Iyar 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Wednesday, May 6th, 2026. We will read Parashat Bahar Bechukotai this coming Shabbat, and it's the 34th day of the Omer. Let's begin. Me'am Loez. We're going to continue learning Parashat Bahar, and we're going to move from really focusing on Shemitah and Shvi'it, the seventh year, to the Jubilee year, or the 50th year. So what is this the 50th year of? The Jubilee year happens after 7 cycles, Shemitah cycles. So a Shemitah cycle is 7 years, right? 6 years you work the field, the 7th you stop, and that's called a Shemitah year. That happens 7 times. And then after those 7 times, after the year of the 7th Shemitah, which would be the 49th year, the 50th year, so the first year of the 8th Shemitah, what would have been the 8th Shemitah cycle, but now is going to become the first Shemitah cycle, the first year of the Shemitah cycle, is always going to be the Yovel year, is going to be the Jubilee year, which obviously equals the 50th year. Now, the Jubilee year has almost all of the same laws as Shvi'it does, meaning you have to sort of do the Shvi'it year again, the Shemitah year once more, which is interesting that now you have to have 2 years in a row that are Shemitah. But there are other more radical things that happened with the Yovel year, namely that slaves are freed. So any slave you have is going to be freed. And remember, these were mostly debt slaves, slaves who put themselves into slavery or had to go into slavery because they couldn't pay back a particular debt. And in doing so, and this is because actually all debts are forgiven on the Jubilee year, which sounds quite radical. It is quite radical, and really an incredible thing that happened, that there was just sort of an economic reset button that happened every 50th year. Probably the most incredible thing, though, is that all lands were returned to their original owners. Now, you might say, okay, well, what is the original owner of the land, right? Isn't it the person who bought it, right? Who has it? Or was there someone who originally owned the land before everybody else? Like, what does this really mean? Because the land is much older than we are. So what does this really mean? When the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, it was apportioned to each of the tribes based on their population, the amount of land that they would receive. And so there was a certain land really apportioned to each tribe. So what would end up happening over the 50th years is people would buy land, the land would move around. And then, so what would eventually happen, though, in the 50th year, whoever originally that land was apportioned to, and originally whose family was supposed to be on that land and working that land would then return to. And in doing so, this actually kept it so that the Danites, the people from the Dan tribe, were always in the same place. The people from from Issachar were always in the Issachar place. The people from the Judites were always in the Judite. Right? Otherwise, the tribes would move around because people would buy and sell. And then you wouldn't actually have the original. You would the tribes would move around so much that you really couldn't say this tribe was there or this tribe is there. And I think that's one of the major reasons why this reset actually happens. But I think it also shows us that our right to the land of Israel, the right of working the land of Israel and using it and living on it, doesn't come through buying and selling, at least from a Torah context, but rather comes from a divine apportionment that happened when the Jewish people entered the land of Israel. And so that is actually reset on this time. And so it might seem unfair that these people who had to sell their land for monetary reasons or for whatever reason now get it back sort of for free. But I think that's looking at it wrong. It's instead understanding why the Jewish people have the land of Israel. Why do people work and live on the land in general? It's because God apportioned it. So this is an important part of that. Obviously, a very inspiring time, very difficult also economically to figure out how this actually works. Obviously, a society that forgives all debt every 50 years. It's going to be a bumpy road trying to sustain an economy like that. There are all kinds of issues that come up that are dealt with in the tradition, and we're going to hopefully deal with some of them as we get and explain this more. When does this, before we end for today, at least the Me'am Loaz part, when does this actually begin? So actually, it begins on Yom Kippur of the Jubilee year. So the Jubilee year obviously begins on the 1st of Tishrei when the year begins, and it begins on the 10th day of the 7th month, which is Tishrei. I know it's the first of the month, but it's the 7th. That has to do with the fact that the Torah seems to think the first month is Nisan, while the rabbis seem to go as the first month being Tishrei. There's a lot of details behind that, but regardless, on Yom Kippur of the Shemitah year is when the actual redemption happens. Shofar is sounded, and all lands returned back to their original owners, their debts are forgiven, and slaves are freed. And it's amazing. I think that happens on Yom Kippur. This day of purification also is the day of national and economic resetting. Mishnah Torah. We're going to continue learning the foundations of Torah, chapter 6. We're on the 6th halacha today, continuing to talk about divine names and their place within halacha. We've learned so far that it's forbidden to erase a divine name, one of these famous 7 names of God. We've learned so far also that other names that we call God by can be erased. So only these 7 specific names can be erased. 7 names can't be erased, I'm sorry. Well, what happens now if you actually write the name of God? What do you do with it? So I think many people know that when you have the name of God and you need to dispose of the paper it's on or whatever object it's on, we bury it, right? So that's what we do as a respectful way of getting rid of that particular document or something like that. And so this is what the Rambam describes in the 6th halacha, that he describes it in a case here of a keli, of some the name written on, or one of the 7 names written on a glass or some kind of piece of metal or something. In that case, if we want to get rid of it, we have to cut that piece off actually, and then bury it, right? Then with the rest of the material, you can get rid of that in any way you want to. So I think this is important for us because you don't need to throw out, let's say you have a paper with the divine name on it. You can cut the divine name out and bury that little whatever that is, and then dispose of the rest of that paper or whatever it is in the regular way. You don't necessarily need to throw out the whole entire thing. I'm sorry, bury the whole entire thing. So very important. He also discusses the case here of writing God's name on one's flesh, which is really interesting because it's actually, of course, forbidden. It's forbidden to get a tattoo, according to the Torah in Judaism, something permanently. But of course, this could be a case where it's not written in permanent ink, right? You can write on your skin, but you certainly should not write God's name on your skin. And obviously writing, and so why, right? Because actually, this is something we see. I've seen many tattoos of people who actually have the tetragrammaton tattooed on their skin, which, by the way, forget about tattoos, right? And obviously forbidden by the Torah. But all the more so, writing one of God's divine names on one's skin is a real problem. Now, why, right? Because you're not going to getting rid of your arm anytime. Let's say you write it on your arm. You're not getting rid of your arm. And when you do pass away, you'll be buried. So, okay, the name will be buried. Seems like it would be perfectly fine. Besides the Torah prohibition of getting a tattoo anyway. So what's the problem? Well, we actually can't have God's name in a place that is either dirty or impure in some way. And we can, and then also, so it really has an effect on where you can actually have your body. If you have God's name written on you somewhere, you actually can't stand in a smelly place or in a dirty place. You really have to be very careful of where. I don't even know how you would go to the bathroom. It would really. You would at least have to cover it up and make sure that it was covered when you were in these places that you had to be like the bathroom. They describe a particular situation of what happens if that person has to immerse in a mikveh, right? We know that in a mikveh, every single part of the skin needs to be in contact with the waters. How does that even work? So what he suggests here is actually bind reeds around where the divine name is, so that at least it's covered. And why is this? Because you actually cannot be naked around God's name, right? So this would actually have to be the same thing also whenever you got naked. Now, forget about immersing. You'd actually have to keep it covered all the time if any of your private parts are showing, what's called erva in Hebrew. And so this would be, of course, very difficult. So if you were going into a mikvah, you would put reeds or clothes around that area. And he just says tie it loosely so that the water can still get under somewhat so that you can technically be counted as immersing. But it's pretty incredible that you're actually not even allowed to wash or anoint that area, because obviously by washing it, you might erase some of it, or it might get duller. And we just can't do that when it comes to divineness. So if you get anything from this episode, don't write God's name on your body, and better yet, better not to get tattoos in general. So very, very important. I will say, while I mentioned tattoos, one of the Bubba mices, though, that you do hear is that somehow you cannot be buried in a Jewish cemetery if you have a tattoo of any kind. That is just not true. Yes, it is forbidden by the Torah to get a tattoo on one's arm, but you still, of course, can be buried in a Jewish cemetery. So we need to defeat that myth. It's important, and I think it really, really hurts people who have tattoos. Either they got tattoos before they were Jewish, or before they were observant, or what have you. There's no need to hold that guilt over somebody like that, and that's not what that's for. Menorat HaMaor. We're going to continue talking about jealousy today, and different types of jealousy that we should all, of course, try to avoid. The Menorat HaMaor is going to divide jealousies that we have into really three categories. We're going to start with the worst category and sort of go into the less worst category. So the worst category of jealousy that we can have is specifically jealousy of someone who is doing God's will, right? So jealousy of someone who is walking in the path of mitzvot. The reason that we are jealous of them is because we hate God and those who serve him and do his will, right? So just serving God annoys you and you think it's wrong, and so you get angry when people do this, and you get upset. Now, I think it's important to look at this for a second and understand jealousy here. Right? We constantly translate this Hebrew word kaneh, kuf nun aleph, as jealous, but it doesn't really. It is jealousy, but it's more than jealousy. And I think you can tell by here, right? It's not that the person wants to do what this person is doing and serve God as well. They really hate what the person is doing. And so that's why they're so upset and angry about it. So this is obviously not a case where someone wants to do that or wants what they have, but rather is just simply hateful of it because they hate it. And so jealousy, I think, is interpreted sort of a little more loosely here in terms of more of like being zealous about something, overly zealous about something, or hating something that somebody else does in an extreme way. But we're going to have to further look into this sort of wider definition of jealousy. I think where we see this most is God, right? Is called a jealous God. Right? Does that mean that God sort of wishes that they can be something else? No, right? Jealous just means sometimes God is zealous about certain things or gets very, very upset about certain things. The second so obviously, I think we can all say this is horrible, right? If you just hate people who serve God because you hate God and you hate Judaism, right? That's pretty bad. Okay. So, but the second category, which I think we honestly find more often, is there one who doesn't hate God. But they sort of feel bad because they're unobservant themselves, or they don't somehow do Judaism. They're not observant themselves. They can't get themselves, for whatever reason, to act according to God's will. And so they actually end up hating the people who do God's will because they actually are jealous in more of an English meaning of this. They're jealous of them. They're jealous that they get to serve God, or that they have the discipline or what have you, or whatever it is, to be able to serve Hashem and to act according to God's laws. And so therefore they hate the person, but they hate them. It's a little bit different than the category above that's more about just, hating them because they hate what they do. But the second category, I think, is very common. It's something I think we bump into all the time, especially amongst, I think I see it often as someone who is an observant Jew who tries to live an observant life. And often the people who get most angry at when something has to be done differently for someone who's observant, or something needs to be changed because of the observance of a certain person, usually the people who get most angry are Jews who don't observe for whatever reason, in my experience. And I actually often am treated my observance and the requirements I need to do for my own observance. Oftentimes I'm respected more by Christians, right? For people who are not even Jewish, because they respect religious observance and they don't have that version of jealousy. But there are, and I'm not saying God forbid all, but there are some Jews who really do feel this way and get very angry with when people are observant, because it somehow means that they are less than, or that somehow we're trying to say that they are less than. And that's, of course, not the case. Or we're just trying to live according to the way in which we think God wants us to live. The last jealousy is actually considered the closest thing you can get to a good jealousy. It's called in Hebrew kinat sofrim. So what this is really is which translates to the jealousy of scribes. What they actually mean here is the jealousy of scholars. And what this means here is like, wow, that person came up with this brilliant take and seems to be smarter than I am. I want to be just like them. So I'm going to work really hard to be better and to compete with this person to be better than them. And what that does, according to our Talmud, is it actually does help one learn. It gives you impetus to learn more and try harder, but it's still for the wrong reason. It's in order to beat somebody else. It's out of jealousy. And so the Talmud sort of is a little bit mixed on this, right? There's an idea that Kinat Sofrim actually makes better scholars. So this jealousy of scholars actually increases wisdom. The sages actually say this at one point. But still, I think the Menorat HaMaor is brilliant in putting it in this place, because he says this is still not a good way to be. And he bases this on a verse in Ecclesiastes, which says, I saw that all labor and skill in work comes from a man's jealousy of his fellow. This too is vanity and striving after wind. So this is a very interesting verse from Ecclesiastes 4:4. So what Shlomo HaMelech seems to be saying in Ecclesiastes here is that what gets people to work and actually achieve things in the world is jealousy of each other. People want to beat each other out. And like everything else in Ecclesiastes, like he says, well, all the work that people do in this world, everything that people do in this world, it's all vanity, it's all raut ruach, right? It's all passing wind or evil wind, right? It's all nothingness. So this kind of, I think if you're looking at this inside of Kohelet, you would say, well, anything, like a million things that we usually think are good, Kohelet says is just vanities, because he seems to be very almost nihilistic about life. But here, at least the way the Menorat HaMaor is looking at this pasuk in Ecclesiastes 4:4 is saying, no, specifically in the case when labor and skill comes out of a man's jealousy, which for the most part, at least the Kohelet Ecclesiastes seems to be saying that's how most things actually happen in this world. Even still, that's why it is vanity and striving after wind. That actual work to do God's will is certainly not vanity and striving after wind, but it only becomes that if you are doing it out of a sense to beat somebody else. And this is certainly the way it is compared to someone who does a mitzvah out of love, out of a sense of wanting to do God's will or wanting to be close to Hashem or in harmony with God's will. This is a very different category. So this is jealousy really about God and serving God. The Menorat HaMaor doesn't introduce it that way. It seems more general at first, but at least in this particular place, it's really jealousy about God and about doing Judaism. So I think this is very interesting, and I think it also helps us when we experience this jealousy against ourselves or experience this jealousy inside of us. We're able to classify it and say, no, this is not right. This is not good. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.